So I'm Rebecca Abraham, CEO and founder of Plesio Health, formerly Acute on Chronic. We are a private corporation, but I have no other disclosures. So what Plesio Health does, if you haven't interacted with us, is we empower people to obtain positive results with plant-based medicine. So hemp, cannabis, psilocybin, any other plant-based medicine. We provide one-to-one care with professional RNs. We create personalized dosing plans, and we have invented and patented a precision dosing technology. So just to jump right in, some of this is going to be an overview for some people, but if you're newer to the cannabis industry, it's going to be probably some new knowledge, and I might clear some things up. So the genus of cannabis is the single species. So after genus, there's species. So cannabis sativa, there's only one. There's not cannabis indica sativa. There is not really cannabis rendalis. It's just cannabis sativa. Scientifically, that's it. So there are variations. That's not nonsense, but not quite different species. Technically, I think once the science gets more robust, I think some of the different chemovars and strains might be described as different species, but that is not the way. But the way marketing in cannabis makes us think is that you have cannabis sativa and then you have these different species. You have indica sativa hybrid, but we don't. We have different chemovars and chemotypes. So for the law, which is different than science, the distinction for legal purposes is the THC of a dry weight in the plant. In hemp, that's below 0.3%, and in cannabis, it's about 5 to 35%. I didn't include a slide about labs and what they show. That's a whole larger discussion. So basic overview of the differences is hemp is 20% THC. It does react to the sun differently than cannabis. Naturally occurring, hemp does have more CBD. Cannabis, or formerly known as marijuana, has higher yield of THC. Both come from CBG, and both have a wide variety of cannabinoids. Hemp is completely federally legal, and cannabis is federally restricted and controlled with no medical use. And you have to pay a lot of money in licensing fees to have a cannabis company, whereas hemp, there's trouble. It's not easy, but there are less hurdles and more government programs and more access to things like banking and hemp technically than there is cannabis. It does get kind of nuanced sometimes, as a lot of operators have experienced and can tell you about. But overall, this is how it is. So I found this slide multiple years ago, and I still use it because I think it's a very good, accurate way of how we should be talking about cannabinoids in the first place. So technically, as you see, we have THC dominant, which does lean into state-regulated, federally illegal cannabis. You have the balance, which again is still in that same bucket of federally illegal cannabis, very strictly controlled. You have CBD dominant, that's hemp, CBG dominant, that could technically be either. And then zero cannabinoids, okay, I do have to cheat on this wonderful scientific slide. Zero cannabinoids is a falsehood. We now know that all hemp and all cannabis plants have cannabinoids. They all have phytocannabinoids. You and I have endocannabinoids. So all living things have cannabinoids. Other plant life has cannabinoids. Things like echinacea hops have some cannabinoids, or they have things that stimulate the endocannabinoid system. And so the term cannabinoid, I think, is going to scientifically start changing. But there's over 20,000 variations. Terpenes, flavonoids, different combinations of cannabinoids within certain hemp and or cannabis plants determine what is in the cannabis plant. And so here we are on this debate of if there's a subspecies, cannabis sativa indica. First of all, everything, not everything, but as I recently found out even more than I previously knew, a lot of the labels we're reading in stores, many of them are not correct. And this is on both sides of the market accurately. Hemp has even less regulations, while cannabis There's a lot of lab shopping happening on the national scale. So this is really happening in California. So very likely things we see labeled are not as they are. Most of the sativa indica hybrid, and like just focusing on if let's assume all the labs and everything on the label is real. Sativa, indica, and hybrid are more marketing terms than really anything else. There's truly no difference between sativa and indica beyond terpenes, different cannabinoid compositions, different ingredients, perhaps in the product, different farming techniques, extraction methods. These are the things that make cannabis affect our body differently. It is just not sativa, indica, hybrid. But there are true differences, but it's not this and how we think. And the categories that we think of, there are some truth there, but overall, we need an entirely new classification system. What's really interesting is biologically, even with strains, we currently don't have enough science to be able to scientifically be able to tell the difference between strains. Because this is really interesting. There's considerable genetic variability found among even what's reported as the same strain. Even if it's the same producer, even if it's the same farm. So you could have Girl Scout cookies, and you could have wide genetic variability. Now, this is what's troublesome, right? And why, a separate talk has to be about labs giving accurate results, less lab shopping, labs really being truthful about what they are extracting and what is in the product. Because with the strain difference, even if it is sent to a lab that is giving accuracy, we still have these phenotypical differences, which will maybe a recreational user would notice, but a medical patient, it could have detrimental effects if there's like a specific terpene action that's helping them. So that's pretty interesting. So more science needed. So the Farm Bill really changed things. And then like anything else, devil's in the details of any type of legislation. And legislators are typically pretty not so great at thinking about, the effects of legislation down the road and various loopholes or consequences of that legislation in the fine print. So in 2018, to be completely honest, Congress kind of accidentally legalized cannabis. It's the same genus. They said that 0.3% THC plant, less than that is completely legal. CBD is legal. Anything you could derive from that hemp plant, as long as that dry weight is 0.3%, legal. Now, there are some like other legal nuances, and I'm not a lawyer and this isn't legal advice, but there are very specific laws that say things like if a substance is similar chemically to an illegal substance, that substance is also illegal. However, with legislation, sometimes the devil is in the teeth. Like, does a legislation and does a bill have teeth? And in this bill, it didn't really have teeth for people who were able to think through some loopholes. Like, they said the dry weight had to be 0.3%. This means we could take something dry and just extract, and then boom, it's still legal. That's not really the case, and that's not really the case either with the synthesized THC products in the hemp market. But here's the benefits for hemp growers, those in the hemp industry. Hemp farmers can apply for crop insurance. Banks often are more willing to work with hemp producers. That doesn't mean they always will, but there's a shot. You sometimes fall under some of the things that agriculture companies and other like large farming bills and provisions get benefits to. So there's very interesting and intricate benefits that come with the Farm Bill. But essentially, it legalized 161 to 162 cannabinoids, including THC. Like the THCA trick is another interesting loop around. The THCA, just to be clear, when you set it on fire and add high temperature, the molecule converts to THC. So THCA, for effective purposes to the consumer market, is THC. So delta 9 is that main psychoactive of both hemp and cannabis. State sanctioned, illegal, federally prohibited cannabis, but this psychoactive substance exists in both. Um, Depending on how high that THC percentage is, depends on chemovars, depends on the sun, depends on a lot of things, and it's agriculture. And of course, it's regulated, must be sold through state licensed dispensaries, cannot cross state lines. If you take anything away from this talk, it's this slide is the best way I could describe the difference between cannabis, hemp in its variety of ways, and cannabis that is in the federally regulated space. Let's assume that cannabis sativa is a domestic house cat. You have your long-haired house cat. So this is your hemp, Mr. Fluffy, delightful cat. Then you have your cannabis state regulated Schedule 1 cannabis. Not on the hemp side, that would be a short-haired house cat. These cats are damn near the same. They behave the same. They have their specific personality quirks, but at the end of the day, they eat the same food. They have very similar behavior patterns, but they have very slight nuanced genetic differences. Long hair versus short hair. Short-haired house cats can be tuxedo cats. Long-hair house cats are typically fluffy. They have just this little bit of variation. So think of the long-haired house cat as hemp, and think of the short-haired house cat as your state-regulated cannabis buttons. And then over here, the cartoon house cat, I compare to your synthetic, but your pharmaceutical grade synthetic. So your Marinol, your Sativa. It's a house cat, but it was created in a lab to mimic these other house cats. But on paper, it has similar features as to a cat. It meows, it eats the same food. Snowball 2, like tuna, lives with a family. And then you have your synthetics that are hemp derived. And that I have the wild cartoon house cat, where it wasn't really tested. It was kind of randomly put together. We don't really know what it's going to do. And so it ends up like this kind of wacky looking, could be really fun and wild cat, but also it might set your house on fire. So this is if you want to think of like how we should think and classify of the differences, which I'm going to deep dive into, think of cats. So other delta 9 THC products. So as you have ever been to a grocery store, beverage store in the last 2 years, suddenly we're seeing lots of THC beverages hit the market. We're seeing THC get mailed ordered. How could that be? So this is where that loophole comes in. There are two different ways that companies are utilizing hemp to get through this loophole. One is fine, health-based, as long as we have regulations. One, I have pretty serious concerns about. So the drinks get by because most are still less than 0.3%, often made with 5 to 10 milligrams of THC total. However, typically by the time it gets to the consumer, there's no longer 5 milligrams in this drink. Aluminum absorbs THC, so most of the THC will be gone by the time it gets to the consumer. It's pretty unstable to make it into a solvent in this way. So we never really know how much THC does get to the end consumer, but the longer it stays in the can, the aluminum sucks up the THC, delta 9. And cans work with alcohol because we know from years and years and years and years and years of science that alcohol as a molecule behaves very differently and doesn't get sucked into the aluminum, whereas the composition of the THC molecule, hemp derived or not, will change, and its stability will change. And some of the extraction methods are questionable, depend, which could also change the molecule. Legally, drinks can go up to 110 milligrams. They don't have to be labeled in any sort of way because there are no regulations in this market. They don't need to be sold in dispensaries. And there's a question of if you were getting even what's advertised in the can. So it does get very consuming both for the industry and the consumer. So hemp derived delta 9. is where my concern lies. But first, let's talk about very clever companies that have utilized hemp extracted Delta 9. This is the same cat. This is Buttons, this is Tuxedo Cat. Um, I'm sorry, this isn't Buttons. This is Mr. Fluffy. This is the long-haired cat. So this is THC as you would get from the cannabis plant that is sold in dispensaries. What has to happen though is you get Delta 9 for these products. This is safer, assuming it's tested and regulated and farmed responsibly. You just need a lot of hemp and you need to extract it to get from your dry weight to your abundant THC in an extraction to put into products. So there is absolutely no difference between hemp extracted Delta 9 when it's just hemp extracted from many, many, many plants versus the state regulated THC from cannabis plants. Um, Usually they isolate it during extraction. The chemical, I want to say this correctly because it does get very nuanced. So depending on extraction method, it could be very expensive to do this. So for folks who have companies that get kind of jealous in the regulated industry of the hemp industry, they're different. So to do this right and safely, you need good extraction methods, and you need a crap ton of hemp plants to extract it out. It is less regulated, which is a problem, but most companies using this way do COAs. Ideally, here's the problem. So hemp derived, and I want to say some companies actually use this terminology incorrectly. So I would caution them to use hemp extracted Delta 9 unless they are hemp derived truly. Hemp derived is a chemically synthesized Delta 9 molecule. Now, this gets a little scary and complicated. CBD goes through a chemical reaction, so they're not using large yield of crops. They're not getting a little bit of THC from hundreds of crops. They are essentially getting the CBD from the hemp and then mashing some carbons into it with pretty explosive, sometimes unstable molecules to get this to make the Delta 10, the hemp derived Delta 9. It's a little bit of a zombie molecule, like the cartoon cat. It's synthesized and it's being sold as plant based cannabis, but make no mistake about it, the hemp derived Delta 9, when they're chemically made, is a synthesized cannabinoid. It is no longer a plant. It has left the world of plants once they smashed the new carbons into it. Um, Very little regulation there. And this is what the hemp extracted Delta 9 process looks like. Most of the time, it's actually extracted in a pretty safe way. Solventless extraction uses ice water bath. If they're actually using solventless extraction, again, this is where regulators do need to come in because there's solventless extraction that is actually using high chemically complicated propane and hydrocarbons, which we don't want in our body. Because this responsible solventless, true solventless extraction using ice water bath, which has a risk of contamination or CO2 extraction, are expensive, but do the job, but yield is lower. So some producers, to make more money, more profit, will use propane, butane, and other hydrocarbons. You can use butane as an extraction method in chemistry. However, you have to remove all butane out. Otherwise, when you heat it, it becomes benzene, which is a carcinogen. So this is what the process looks like. You have hemp flowers, it goes to milling, you get powder, you decarboxylate it, decarboxylated power, extraction, crude oil. This is that process. So I always question when I see solventless. I typically want to talk to the product maker and say, when you say solventless, what do you mean? If they say ice water bath with very fancy extraction tools, it's good. CO2 extraction, great. Ethanol extraction, I'm also fine with. Hydrocarbons worry me. And then you have the semi-synthetic cannabinoids that are a little bit of both. So Delta 8 is kind of tricky. It's a little bit of all the But it technically exists as that wildcat with the breathing fire and umbrella on its tail. It's semi-synthetic. So delta 8 technically does exist in cannabinoid plants, but it would technically be significantly too expensive to get the yield of delta 8 out of the naturally occurring plant. So typically, what is sold in the market is the hemp-derived CBD, where they're taking the CBD molecule, mashing other carbons into it, and creating delta 8 THC. And strangely, the law didn't capture for delta 8, right? They captured for delta. Nobody was anticipating that a delta 8 or delta 10 would exist. Chemical process leaves contaminants, probably no way to know if they've been removed or what they can do. We have no good scientific data on delta 8. We just don't. There's no regulation. It is found to have significantly more heavy metal contaminants. So that's like arsenic, lead, mercury, things you don't really want to consume. Arsenic can kill you, lead could cause brain damage and make you very, very unwell. And there's no age restrictions. I know in some states they have over 18, over 21, but it's pretty easy to get. And the Delta 8 and the HHCs in the world concern me more with adolescents than would, plant-based cannabis. Because essentially we've made a new synthetic that is more or less a pharmaceutical that we're selling as plant cannabis. So why this market is so huge is you're selling the benefits of plant extracted cannabis when you're actually selling a synthetic. So most research we have is anecdotal and it's not peer reviewed, and typically it doesn't involve human subjects. Other semi-synthetic cannabinoids, PHDO and HHC. PHDO can cause E-Valley, very similar. It's not regulated at all. Unclear psychological effects, but we do see lung fibrosis and oftentimes pneumothorax. And we used to have that before. If you remember the early 2000s, K2 spice, more closely related to HHC, THCO, PHCP than plant-based cannabis are. We've seen deaths, acute MI, strokes, all sorts of not good things. So that is super quick and fast science. I have more and we could discuss. Thank you.
Thank you for that. And I appreciate you really talking through the extraction methods and how that really impacts the quality of products that you buy, because that's not something that I believe is common knowledge, specifically when it comes to hemp. I think when it comes to cannabis, especially if you've been in the industry for a while, you understand that process for cannabis products. But when it comes to hemp products, how that really impacts the health relation between consumption and production is really important. I'll always use this example. I have like a 19-year-old cousin who will text me and say, "Hey, what are your thoughts on this vape?" Because I'm the general cannabis expert in my family at this point.
Yeah.
And I'm like, "What do you mean? What are my thoughts on this vape? How did you get a vape? You're 19." And he's, I got it from the gas station, or I got it from this shop. What are ways that we can really speak to other people to advocate for just having a better understanding of what they should be looking for in products? Because I've had to explain to him specifically, you shouldn't be able to buy vapes. And if you're going to be buying this from this gas station or from these spaces, it's going to probably not be the best option for you. So like, what can we really talk to people about when they're unsure, is this cannabis, is this not cannabis?
Yeah. Um, I would say talking about it, if you could find it in a gas station currently, I would almost always put it in the not cannabis pile. Um, Same thing with like vape shops. I know there are some brands that are doing and the kind of slang for it. I know is nobody in the industry likes to hear it, but the slang is hot cropping. Like the hot cropping is so much safer. Some of those products do leak through to the vape market, but my general advice if anybody's asking, like if you can buy it in a gas station, buy it in a vape shop. If you can buy it in a 7-Eleven, you don't want to buy it, especially with the vapes. Like, if I had more time, if you ever want a part two, I could show you the chest X-ray of somebody with E-volley and somebody with a chest X-ray where they gave themselves fibrosis slowly by smoking the hemp-derived hemp products, and eventually they coughed so hard after taking the poof they blew out. So I would say if you can get it kind of easily and it's not through a dispensary, um, overall, no. I do think that the nuances of this have the potential to really mess up the entire cannabis industry. So I feel like it is becoming a public health issue, not in the like war on drugs, like McGruff the crime dog. This is your brain egg on drug. Like, um, a chemist told me last week, at this science conference, where he has an organization that is essentially like consumer protection, but for cannabis. That anytime a substance becomes expensive and goes over $10 a gram, you can expect predatory people to start making false versions of that for cheaper to make more money. We see it in saffron. Apparently, cinnamon. Don't buy dollar store applesauce because the cinnamon has lead in it. Um, so it's not just us. Apparently, this is something that all industries at one time or another will experience. So a little bit, you probably need, unfortunately, it's going to take a lot of work by all of us to get the government to not, like what Gavin Newsom did in California wasn't right. To just ban all hemp products. Like that's what not a solution. Because there are good, like the CBD, the CBG, like that's awesome. Hemp derived, look, I did it too. Hemp extracted, hemp extracted THC from hemp, probably fine. So it's going to be like I think a big public health undertaking. But overall, if it's in a gas station, vape shop, convenience mart, don't do it. Oh, I see some questions.
Yeah.
Do you want me to answer them?
Yes, please. You can just kind
Cool.
of, you can start with the one that says thank you for for this presentation.
Yeah. Yes. I'm happy to share it for high school wellness because unfortunately, this hiccup in the market, what's funny is sometimes regulations are more and restrictions are more hurtful than beneficial. In the case of cannabis, this is very, very true. Teenagers overall, you shouldn't consume cannabis until your brain is developed at 25. However, if you're going to mess around as a teen with an undeveloped brain, the plant-based cannabis is so much safer and regulated. The problem is it's harder for adolescents to obtain when buying these products in a gas station, vape shop, 7-Eleven. It's just the bar is just so much easier. So I'd be happy to talk about this with high schoolers. They do have that brain, like part of their brain where like sure it could happen. Not to them. But yes, it could slowly over time. So yeah, to that. Um, More about THCO, THCP, HHC, and health impact and how they get you high. So how does to explain this, I'll explain how cannabis works in the first place as briefly and easily as I can. So plant-based phytocannabinoids, hemp and cannabis, so our two house cats, work on our bodies because they interact and connect with CB1 and CB2 receptors. Where we see people getting sick, potentially even leading to things like cannabis hyperemesis syndrome, is when we overstimulate those receptors. So when you have too much high THC, so even when you buy like a joint that's like has like a dipped in a dab, and you smoke it, it feels sick to your stomach. It's because your CB1 receptors, why you get the like racing heart, overstimulate your CB1 receptors. That's when you vomit. Um, these THCO, THCP, delta 8, super overstimulate those CB1 receptors. And it's the overbinding. It's like THC can't truly click in. CBD and other cannabinoids prevent it. these synthetic, and it's not a very choosy receptor either, unfortunately. Like it will go to the dance with anybody. So it has these like kind of, you know, it doesn't know the difference. Our receptors don't know the difference between real house cat and the crazy cartoon cat. And so the crazy cartoon cat has the same access to these CB1 receptors with nothing stopping it. So that's how they get you high, but it's also why they make you more sick with more symptoms. And it's just behaves super chemically differently.
And can you, for those who may not know, can you explain what THCO, THCP, and HHC are?
Yeah, so these are just molecules that have been made by taking legal hemp products like CBD. Sorry, my earphone keeps falling out there. These hemp molecules that start legitimate, good, pure. They're taken to a lab and using typically hydrocarbons, so propane, gasoline. We don't even know some of what the solvents are, and they cram a lot of hydrogen to make it a molecule that behaves and can get you high like THC. So the THCO chemically looks pretty similar to THC delta 9, except it overbinds. When it's inhaled, THCO has a lot more chemical similarities to vitamin E acetate, which is what led to E-Valley. And then if you don't know what E-Valley is, it is the electronic cigarette lung vaping inflammation. And it's real. Um, I've seen and talked to doctors about people, young people who've needed complete lung transplants, and all they were using was and this, you could probably see where the problem for the cannabis industry comes in with a cannabis vape pen. Now, did the doctor or the patient know enough to say, hey, what do you mean by cannabis? Is it something you got at a vape store or did you buy it from an MSO? The answer, once I actually talked to the physician about this particular patient, it was indeed a cannabis vape pen, but it was purchased at a vape shop, which was the red flag that like this isn't cannabis at all, actually. But the doctor from that point on is like any inhalant of cannabis is dangerous and bad and like acutely dangerous and bad, right? But that's not the case. Like we know, like, there are safer ways to vape cannabis. There's safe ways to consume it. It's one of those things where there's risks and benefits. But very, very different, two different products. So THCO is very similar to vitamin C acetate. THCP is such a new molecule that I don't even quite understand it. It's supposed to get you super high. It is what I've heard and briefly reading over a paper. But anytime I hear that, I think, oh shit, that's going to override that CB1 hard and like cause some problems. So I'm like, oh God. And then they have CBDP, which I think has the same problem. It could even be essentially sometimes what you're an HHC. I met one of the inventors of HHC and I was horrified from that point on. HHC came to be because some guy was having his chemist just mess around in the lab to see what intoxicating substance that they could create from CBD derivatives. And they randomly discovered HHC and he tried it himself. That's the science. He tried it on himself and he didn't die. And now he is a millionaire moving like tanks of hydrogen through municipalities. He's selling it in Europe. And his science that's the safe is, well, I tried it on myself and I'm fine. Um, Marie Curie worked with radiation for years and was fine, but she did eventually die from radiation poisoning because why we don't do science on ourselves. The reason why plant cannabis is safe is because we have thousands upon thousands of years of anecdotal evidence. We have historical data. We have 30,000 scientific studies showing the safety and millions. And I always say this, like, there have been millions upon millions of dollars poured into finding the harms of plant-based cannabis, and we cannot find them. There has not been millions and millions of dollars poured into finding the dangers of Delta 8. So it does get tricky. And so, should Delta 8 hemp be labeled as weed? Ugh. I would say no, just because of by the time it gets to us common people without chemistry labs, um, and knowing that there's like a good producer, I think overall it's more of a synthesized chemical that the consumer is getting, particularly with regulations. And that's the kind of biggest issue with the hemp industry. You can label any of these things whatever you want. The HHC guy said that until the government cracks down on him, he's just going to keep selling products. And we, as scientists, were like holding our chest horrified. We're like, but don't you care about the consumer? And he was like, well, it's the consumer's responsibility. They have free will. If they want to buy my product and take a risk, that's not on me. And I was like, oh, but you're not not being fully transparent. So I would say no. And like, what's the solution, right? Because we don't want to have any more of this like prohibition, war on drugs crap anymore, right? So we definitely shouldn't like punish the consumer. Um, but there definitely needs to be regulations where you can't, like that guy, that guy in particular, literally said he's going to make his money, and by the time he gets charged with anything or pinned down by a regulator, he's going to have enough money to battle that out in court, and he's going to declare bankruptcy, take his sack of money, and move on. It's literally in the business calculation of some of these companies. So I feel like there needs to be more nuance and regulations, but it's a little bit up to us in the cannabis industry. Unfortunately, we've kind of been left to regulate ourselves to try to give consumers the best education we can. There is Jeffrey Lawson, who I madly respect, has I he does have this consumer cannabis protection nonprofit, ICC, I think it's called. So he's somebody who is essentially like self-regulating, and I think that's what it's going to take. So the entire cannabis industry doesn't get roped into the harms that HHC is doing. So it's an even bigger problem in Europe. At least people have like a shot here at not getting poisoned by fraudulent products on the hemp market. In Europe, it's very, very bad because they do not have regulated cannabis at all, really medically. And so I've seen multitudes of tourists going into these, and you'll see things labeled THC, Delta 9, and you're like, no, that's not it.
If you could speak to legislators and kind of talk to them about what should be done when it comes to the concept of regulating hemp, and I think there could be some contention between the two industries, because I think there's the battle of cannabis is so overly regulated while hemp is such a free open market. What advice or what would you tell a legislator who was kind of considering how to approach hemp and cannabis?
Yeah, what I would do, um, first, I would say open up the cannabis market, take away 280E, allow everybody to use a bank, and reschedule. While I do think descheduling is the absolute proper thing to do, um, legally cannabis should be off the schedule list. However, now that you have so many bad actors and so much money that have snuck into this market, I actually unfortunately think that we have to take our time to get the descheduling, because if we completely descheduled right now, there would be so much, the industry, because of all the restrictions that were kind of blindly set up um, in some of these states, Idaho, South Carolina, Florida, would be flooded. Even the medical like marijuana, like 36 markets that there are, would be flooded with bad products. And we would go from descheduling right back to Schedule One so fast because there would be so many, there would just be so much grand harm, like significant statistically numbers done. So I would recommend eventual descheduling, but begin with rescheduling to literally get healthcare workers, consumers, and regulations in place to fix the current problems of our industry. And now everybody's like, oh God, like rescheduling doesn't help us. Yes, it does. It's going to take away um, it's going to take away 280E. It has to. It's going to make banking better. It has to. And with government, you never can put things back in the box. No state is going to allow their tax money to be taken away. And yet, the taxes here too high. But we make too much money to have rescheduling take it all away from states. It's not going to happen. So I would ask for rescheduling and I would have it toned down to like a Schedule 5. It doesn't belong in 3, doesn't belong at all. So let's make it a 5. Um, Money in public health, sure. As a business, you can do whatever you want that's legal. You can absolutely sell things. I'm very much politically, this is like the one thing libertarian about me. I do believe that humans have the right to consume and do whatever they want to their bodies as long as it doesn't harm anybody else, as long as they have informed consent. So there could still be HHC, but there should absolutely be consumer protections that warn you about exactly what that is. Um, just like cigarettes. Do I care if somebody smokes? No. Do I want them to know the full picture of what they're getting themselves into? Yes. Same with alcohol. It just needs to be labeled appropriately and accurately. And in that case, that's where I'm like very like open policy, where like I think it does more harm to prohibit things. I don't think that's the solution. So I'm always a no on prohibitions, but I even think the same thing about drugs like cocaine. Like we actually shouldn't have it prohibited. It just makes it more tempting when people have to go to illicit markets to feed whatever they're feeding with various substances. We get more problems than not. So I feel like probably the same thing in cannabis. If you like getting high with HHC, as long as that guy is like, hey, my experiment here is I did this on myself. You're doing self experimentation with a completely unknown molecule in the human body. Go for it. Like, but people should know. So that would be like my magical solution is make barriers to entry for cannabis companies in the regulated markets. They have to either super drop the bar and then better regulations and demand like transparency on products.
And we talked a lot about Delta 8, Delta 9, and HHC and variations of cannabis derived products or hemp derived product. As we're talking about general CBD, because I think that has been on the market for so long that many people may not really know who are some good brands or companies or ways in which you can find good CBD products that are actually giving you these medical effects, because we all know some products may claim that they have CBD in them, but you may not really feel or see the impact. So what is your guide to really navigating CBD as a whole?
Yeah. So the CBD market has been an interesting one. So a study in the Journal of American Medicine. So when you're looking at CBD product, here's how you comb through to get to the best product. 77% of all CBD products were fraudulent, mostly olive oil. So if you've used CBD and you felt nothing, it could have been part of that 77%. You take the last 23% of real CBD, I would say about 10% of that, whip away another 10% for fields full of toxins, extracted like crap. So that leaves us with 13% of real products. So what products are some good? Who is a good producer? What do you look for? How do we tell the difference? And how do you tell the difference? Once you get there, it's a COA. If they have a COA and like a full COA where they talk about heavy metals, where they talk about cannabinoid composition, because you'll get a COA, which takes away the other 5%. It'll just be what cannabinoids. They very intentionally skip out of like heavy metals, mold, like it's gone. In this case, once you get the COA, check for heavy metals, check for cannabinoid compounds, check for those things. And then I didn't have to say this, the world has changed. Then you have to be sure that they go to a legitimate third party lab. There are labs out there, and there seem to be the ones that stay in business, that they will give any numbers and any report you want as long as you pay them. So now we're at a place where we can't even trust, it frustrates me, we can't even trust any third party laboratories. I'm still trying to figure out who the legitimate labs are, unfortunately. Like I would love to give names. Like if you see like this lab, like the COA is real. It's gotten harder because the good labs have closed because people in the industry didn't want to use them because they weren't spitting out what they wanted to print. But let's assume, so at this point, we do our due diligence. We do our best to see that that's a real COA. And then after that, I talked to the owner. I asked them about farming. Where's their plants from? Indoor, outdoor, where is it shipped from? And unfortunately, the CBD market, I've seen a lot of honest owners get decimated by this market. Some of the brands that I trusted the most are gone. There's still some left. So who do I still like? In the CBD world alone, Kaw Valley Cannabis, very small farm outside of Lawrence, Kansas, has nano emulsion. They're fantastic. They're responsive. They're very honest. When I first met them, they had a COA right for me. They were not messing around. Miriam Hemp is good, high quality. One of the few that has CBD also. Equilibrium is another company that I've liked. They still exist. They're doing well. So those are three off the top of my head. If you get into states, some of the, like I'll know if a product's good by who is doing their extraction, like what's their manufacturing process. So it gets really nuanced, but those are three hemp companies off the top of my head that I work with pretty frequently, where I like constantly read their COAs and have had good patient results. Bluebird Botanicals has been traditionally good. And these things can change. So that's what makes it actually worse too. Wild has actually been traditionally good despite how far reaching they are in multiple states. But these things can also change on a dime. So there was one particular company, I almost called them out, but I didn't. One particular company started off very responsible in the CBD space, very good. It was small, because they were good, they grew. Today, I can't always consistently recommend their product. They're on both sides of the market because they were bought and sold and changed hands, that the original product is no longer what it used to be. So unfortunately, these things are also constantly changing because the cannabis industry and the hemp industry all have got harder. So people sometimes, unfortunately, make this shift to things that aren't necessarily safe for their consumer to make more money. So a brand I say that I love today could always change hands and change the formula. So if you look up somebody I gave props to today and you're like, Rebecca, they have E. coli in their cannabis, that's why we have to have constant COAs. Don't believe the COA from 2018. And some of the problems with things on plants is even beyond what you think. Again, credit to Jeffrey Lawson, who I did not think of this, but I should have. It's not just the mold we're worried about, it's any bacteria that's on your plant. Even if the bacteria is gone, the poop from the bacteria when smoked, for example, that's a carcinogen. Like you don't want to eat the poop of bacteria, and it's all microscopic and we can't see it, and it could lead to a whole host of viral illnesses, bacterial illnesses, things we're not actually yet prepared for. So this all of the science is constantly changing. So plus CBD, I've liked them. And so plus CBD, I've liked them. I can't remember specifically. There was like two brands that have similar. I think plus CBD is A-okay, and I think they have a product that I like. There's another brand that I'm forgetting to that's good. Lily Heel has been traditionally really good. I know Bluebird. Lazarus. Lazarus Botanicals. We have great patient results. And they have decent COAs. And we've gone back and forth with companies. There was one, again, I'm not going to call them out. I've recommended a company before, and then I've seen their COAs change, and I was like, oh God, no. And then they changed again, and we went back to using them. So it's constantly, uh, constantly changing at this point.
Someone asked if you have checked out Plus CBD brand.
Yeah, that's the brand where I think they're pretty good. And I think they have a product that I like. They have a CBD, I think, plus PEA, the whole thing that stimulates your endocannabinoid system. Yeah, I don't think we aggressively have recommended them, but I will look into them further. So I always kind of like look in to see and like, oh, is this brand good? Typically I find, well, this isn't as common. Around 2019, I felt like every patient I worked with's nephew had a CBD company. That's gone away. So it was getting kind of hard. Kind of the market conditions kind of took away everybody jumping in and having their own CBD company. So a little bit easier now.
Okay, so we're in our last 5 minutes. I want to give you an opportunity to kind of talk a little bit more about Plesio Health and the services that you provide.
Yeah. So this is actually very important to my work and understanding the nuances. So essentially what Plesio Health does is if you were a former or current cannabis consumer, or medical consumer, or if you or somebody you know is totally naive to this, what Plesio Health does is we work with patients to find exactly the right product and dosing combination to work for whatever you need. And so that's for adult use folks looking to optimize the recreational use, or what we're really needed for, because even that is very complicated. Um, what we really do is pick out safe and effective products and dosing for people who use medical cannabis. So we will recommend products to you, dosing, teach you things like this. If you are using medical cannabis already and you're using a product that might not be too healthy for you, we will educate you about that product. Please make your own decision, or we'll recommend a new one. And a lot of people are afraid, like if they're when working with us, like, oh, if I smoke a lot, like these nurses are gonna like take away what I do that works for me. No, um, because my kind of brand of working in healthcare is patient autonomy first, is we try to meet the patient where they're at. We always give you full information so you have informed consent. We try to steer you in a direction if we think it's like a little bit healthier, we'll help you, but we do meet you where you're at. And soon we are building a precision dosing tool where you could quantify how therapeutic your cannabis, even how high you are. And it will be able to be an assessment tool both in facilities and at your own home as an outpatient, and it will give you an exact dose of what to do next. So if you use too much THC, for example, it would tell you how much to decrease it by and what product to use. So that's what we do.
Thank you again for this session. I think it's really important. I don't know if there's many conversations about just the difference between cannabis and hemp, so I really appreciate how thorough you were with that explanation. Um, do you have any closing remarks that you'd like to give?
Um, just always, I would say, if you are an operator, and the gang war between hemp and cannabis, I feel like they're different battles, but both are equally hard. There are good manufacturers engaging on the hemp side, and there are good manufacturers on the cannabis, and there's bad operators in both spaces too. So the good people should link up and work together to help the other good companies on both sides of the space, because the high tide helps all boats. And we should just all let the bad people think. And yeah, with the hemp derived, hemp extracted market, our job has actually gotten significantly, but it even more needed than it was. So if you have any questions, think of us. We're happy to work with you. Yeah, and if you own or know good brands, please send them our way so we can tell other people about them and work with them. So thank you.
Thank you. Right, and we will get started on the next session in a few minutes. So again,
And scientific. So I'm Rebecca Abraham, CEO and founder of Plesio Health, formerly Acute on Chronic. We are a private corporation, but I have no other disclosures. So what Plesio Health does, if you haven't interacted with us, is we empower people to obtain positive results with plant-based medicine. So hemp, cannabis, psilocybin, any other plant-based medicine. We provide one-to-one care with professional RNs. We create personalized dosing plans, and we have